Hello. The Divine Code reading for March 13th. The second part of the reading, page 24. That's out of the editor's preface at the beginning of the book. How the practical topic 3, how the practical details of the Noahide Code are determined. And this begins at the bottom of page 23, continues to 24, and then at the top of page 25. Gentiles are obligated to fulfill the 7 Noahide commandments because they are the eternal commandment of God, transmitted through Moses, our teacher, in the Torah. Since the exclamation of every commandment in the written Torah is established according to the oral Torah, as it was given over through Moses, our teacher, and transmitted from generation to generation through the Jewish sages. It can thus be concluded that the rules which guide Torah law decisions regarding the 613 commandments are the same rules which guide Torah law decisions for Gentiles, aside from a few exceptions which are explained in this work. So the 7 laws are part of the Torah. The 7 Noahide laws as laws that are given to the nations other than the Jews. The Jews have their 613 commandments that are part of the Torah. Non-Jews are given 7 commandments that are also considered to be part of the Torah. And the same rules apply in how these laws are determined. There are certain rules that apply to Jewish halakha, rules of exegesis, which determine how the rules are learned out. The same dynamic also applies to the 7 laws because it's part of the Torah. Rambam, that's Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon or Maimonides, who lived 1135 to 1204, was the first to codify these commandments, albeit in a very concise form. In his rulings, known to be based on the same rules which guide the oral Torah for the Jewish commandments, unless he stated a specific exception. This reasoning is borne out of numerous discussions in the Talmud that deal with the Noahide commandments. So the Noahide commandments are very briefly discussed in the written Torah, the 5 books of Moses. They are explained more fully in the Talmud, and then they're codified in Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, which is a very organized codification of these laws. And Maimonides goes into these laws in some detail, not extreme detail, but in some detail. And this is also discussed throughout history by the rabbis that have discussed these laws. So we find bits and pieces of it throughout history, where if we bring all these pieces together, it helps to explain what the laws are. For the sake of determining the Torah law for Gentiles more comprehensively, Rabbi Weiner used the rulings in Rambam's Mishnah Torah as the main foundation, since Rambam is the principal Torah law authority in this area. The importance of Rambam as primary authority in the precepts of the Jewish people is well known. In the words of Rabbi Yosef Karo, who lived 1488 to 1575, author of the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law, for he, that's Rambam, is the most famous Torah law authority in the world. As quoted from Rabbi Yosef Karo's introduction to his book, Beit Yosef. So, Rabbi Yosef Karo, he wrote a couple of books, or a couple of sets of books One is the Beit Yosef, which goes into great detail concerning the laws, or how the background understanding for the laws, and the debates going back and forth. Then he also wrote the Shulchan Aruch, which is a set. It's set in an organized manner without the background discussion, which is found in the Beit Yosef. And he used the Rambam for his foundation, for his work. The Rambam, who lived 400 years earlier, 500 years earlier. Thus, on any issue for which Rambam differed from only one other Torah law authority, the opinion of Rabbi Yosef Karo, decided upon for his Shulchan Aruch, was the opinion of Rambam. So as Rabbi Yosef Karo in his Beit Yosef went through the different arguments and discussions, and most of the time the other rabbis all went with the Rambam. Occasionally they would have a different opinion. The majority of rabbis would have a different opinion, and therefore in those cases Rabbi Yosef Karo would go with wherever the majority was. And the majority usually went with the Rambam. Therefore, it's possible to use the Rambam as a foundation. And it should also be noted that the Chinuch, which is another one of these sets of books, also it refers to the Rambam's Mishnah Torah as the King's Highway. So even in areas where the author of the Chinuch differed in opinion, he would always go with the Rambam because he felt, the Rambam was the standard. So even if he wasn't sure of something, and even if he had disagreements with it, he would always go with the Rambam. So that's what other rabbis will do, including what Rabbi Moshe Weiner, who's writing that's the three books right behind me here. That's Rabbi Moshe Weiner's Sheva Mitzvahs Hashem, which was translated as the Divine Code, translated into English and called the Divine Code. This holds even more so for the precepts of the Noahide commandments. For Rambam is nearly the only Rishonim, that's refers to the leading rabbis during 1000 to 1500, who succeeded in the later Talmudic sages, that's 200 to 500, and the Gaonic sages, 589 to 1038, in the transmission of the oral tradition. So as we went from one stage to the other, one era of rabbis to another, Rambam is the only Rishonim, that's a particular era of rabbis, who took responsibility for authoritative teachings in this area. That's the areas of the Noahide laws. The other well-known classic rabbinic works, such as the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, did not provide explicit Torah rulings for Torah laws for Gentiles. So in the Shulchan Aruch, and even in the Torah, which is the exclamations, the arguments behind that discussed behind the Shulchan Aruch, there's they did not specifically address non-Jews. There's a lot of discussion concerning non-Jews because Jews interact with non-Jews on a regular basis. Therefore, there's a lot of discussion, but it's always from the perspective of the Jew. The Rambam was the only one that gave direct teaching as it would apply to non-Jews. And even in his, it's only a couple. It's only a couple of parts. It's only a small segment of his unit of books, but it's still there, and that gives Rambam a more comprehensive foundation for a work on the Noahide laws. Instead, we must gather insight from different points that they wrote regarding observance of Torah law precepts for Jews. And these, in turn, imply their opinions about observance of Torah precepts for Gentiles. So we can learn a lot. There's large parts of the Torah law for Jews that are basic understandings, basic reasonings that would also apply to Gentiles. And sometimes it just requires a little bit of shift of perspective. And sometimes it just discusses, because it's discussing the relationship between Jews and Gentiles, it helps to understand how the Gentiles are to behave, are to act. So we can still learn from these things, even if they don't have direct discussion of Noahide laws. Therefore, Rambam is the main Torah law authority whose opinions is to be considered in these matters, and therefore his opinion is given more weight than any other single authority. Still, exceptions can be found, and in the Sheva Mitzvahs Hashem, Volume 1, Rabbi Weiner extensively researched and cited the broad spectrum of rabbinic sources, and not just Volume 1, which would be that book right there, but also, well, no, that would be that book right there, but also Volume 2 and Volume 3, which was not available at the time that this author's preface was written. Rabbi Weiner continued to extensively research these topics. In a few cases, there is a majority of other Rishonim authorities in the Shulchan Aruch all differ from Rambam. Rabbi Weiner decided the Torah law according to their teachings and not according to the opinion of Rambam. So the Rambam would be the foundation, but if a large number of other rabbinic authorities said something different, then in that case they would go with the majority. Normally the majority went with Rambam, so you could just look at Rambam and see what it says. But there are some cases where the Torah authorities went otherwise, in which case they would have to determine what to do. And then it usually goes with the majority. In every case, Rabbi Weiner clearly explained the spectrum of sources and the basis of his conclusions in the footnotes for the text of the Sheva Mitzvahs Hashem. The complete footnotes in the Hebrew edition and footnotes in the English edition, which were abridged in some places, to limit the amount of technical rabbinic discussions that are not relevant to most readers. They are placed and numbered the same with only a few exceptions. Thus, the English and Hebrew text can easily be cross-referenced by those who wish to study the subject in more depth. And so it's designed that the Divine Code and the Sheva Mitzvahs Hashem books work together. At least it was in the first and second editions of the Divine Code, so that we have the basics of the discussions are available in the footnotes. I've noticed places where we have very short footnotes in the Divine Code, and the Sheva Mitzvahs Hashem might go on for a couple pages. So there's a lot more discussion in the Sheva Mitzvahs Hashem in their footnotes. I am concerned because I've been learning in a class where the rabbi is using the what's called the special editions, be the third edition of the Divine Code. And in there, it seemed that he was skipping over a lot of material, and then I realized that no, it was just taken out. So it seems that there's been more of a consolidation. And if by looking at the Kindle version of the Divine Code, which was recently published, it seems that the footnotes are no longer numerated in the same way. And there's definitely been large chunks of the Divine Code that have been taken out of the Kindle version. And if following that, we later this year are expected to have a new full version, a full translation, a completed translation of the Divine Code. And what I've seen so far, it seems that both the footnotes and the text are being cut back in length, taking away a lot of this this depth, which is going to make it more difficult to cross-reference the books. And hopefully that'll be worked out before the publication. But otherwise, this part here, this page here, does help to explain how the rules are or how the determinations were developed for this work. Thank you.